Metro Awakening is an amazing yet haunting experience that finally made its way into virtual reality. But how good is it really? And should you play it? Let's dive right into it. Now, Metro Awakening is made by the studio known as Vertigo Games, and they have clearly done their very best to port this popular franchise into VR. But since we have a lot to cover in this review, let's start it off with the gameplay. Because in here, you will be dropped in a post-apocalyptic version of Moscow, where almost everything around you is either hunting you down or mutated in some sort of way. And although it is not nearly as broad in scope as the most recent title, like Metro Exodus, it should still take you around 12 hours before you reach the end credits. And doing so, it does manage to capture many of these series staples, from the interesting improvised weaponry to its scavenging, sneaking, and first-person shooting. And it is also exactly those implemented weapon mechanics that are one of the main strengths of the game. Because while you will start off with a fairly basic pistol and AK-47, the enemies that you will be fighting do react on the impact of your shots, making it feel much better than the more often seen bullet sponge targets in other games. But later in the game, you will also find some other weapons like a crossbow and even a shotgun. And while we have seen all these archetypes already 100 times before in VR, it is the way you reload them and their looks that feel right at home among the unique, cool makeshift weaponry that the Metro series is known for. So with all things considered, the game's weapons have a great overall feel to them. And the same can be said for the scavenging, since the detailed environments generally give you enough to look at while peeking around the corners and down hallways to see if you can spot some extra supplies. But it also has a heavy emphasis on preparing yourself before your next encounter takes place. Because if you just rush into a fight without making sure your mechs are loaded, or with not being able to operate your weapons confidently under pressure, you will most likely get overwhelmed and overrun quickly, since there can be something and someone around nearly every corner. But luckily, most of the time, there is also a way to enter combat with stealth, instead of going guns blazing right into it. And while for some this might not be the most exciting way to play the game, it can make your life a lot easier in Metro. But surprisingly, the enemy AI is also pretty good and responsive. That means they will frequently communicate amongst each other, as well as move around the environment quite freely, giving them a certain sense of intelligence. While some other enemies, like the red mutants for example, can be a bit annoying when they come up from behind you with little to no time to react to their presence. But even they have a great AI reaction system, like running away after taking some initial damage, and peering around the corners before popping out to bite you. But something to keep in mind, which made me take off my headset a couple of times, is that the game has an actual arachnophobia warning at the start. And for good reasons too, because there are several levels with big spider enemies, including times where they are literally jumping on your face. So while I can understand the creepiness of these moments, I can imagine a lot of people will end up smacking their headset once or twice while trying to pull off these monsters. Luckily, the studio did announce on X that they will be adding an arachnophobia mode to it, which takes out these 8-legged crawlers just in case. But another important thing to mention is that while Metro Awakening has some strong VR fundamentals and a compelling first half, it is the second half of the playthrough that unfortunately does become a bit more repetitive when it comes to the gameplay. But that gets us to the immersion. Since while most of Metro's environments aren't the most interactive, it does have a great sense of atmosphere thanks to detailed surroundings that feel authentic in a way that much of the world looks like it's been cobbled together from the remnants of a fallen society. And for better or worse, the inherent claustrophobia of being stuck in an underground maze really lands on a VR headset, where walking through the game's labyrinth tunnels and hallways makes you feel like there's nowhere to run from the dangers within. And the constantly good ambient sound design really helps to sell the game's tension, although a lot of times the game's music would kick in out of nowhere, which kind of spoils the upcoming encounter that would otherwise have been a surprise. And while there is so much detail visually in the world, it would add also to the immersion if you could actually grab and look at all the things that are scattered around just a bit more. But another frequently used immersive mechanic in the game is the holster system, which generally works quite well, but you sadly do have to remember where all your invisible inventory is located. But I do really appreciate the inventory design, which basically lets you have two backpacks, with one for guns and the other one for equipments like grenades, a gas mask, and health vials. And in both cases, your items are genuinely represented on your backpacks at full size, rather than just shrinking them down unrealistically and stacking them into infinite piles, which in my opinion makes for an immersive way to not only communicate to the player how many supplies they have, but also to create a way to interact with them and actually retrieve their items from their backpack. With another great addition being the easy chest inventory slot. So if you're holding a pistol and you would reach out to your chest, then you will pull out the pistol's magazine. And this feels so much more natural and practice, while also minimizing the cognitive load of frequent actions like reloading. But before we get to the graphics and story, and while still on the topic of immersion, let's have a quick word from the company that made this video possible, because none other than CatVR, who are known to create VR treadmills that look like they come straight out of Ready Player One, are taking VR once again to the next level. Because while we normally are limited by the space and boundary system inside our virtual reality experiences, it is CatVR that has been creating VR treadmills that let you run, crouch, and jump without any limitation. And since their most recent version, that is known as the C2 Core, is compatible with nearly every headset, it is often also considered as the dream upgrade for any VR setup. And they even go so far that for those hardcore fans, they also have high-end models that include things like haptic feedback or a vehicle hub, making it feel even more realistic, like riding on a horse inside VR. And as a cherry on top, you can also use the code VRelity for a $130 discount on your entire purchase. So for those who are interested, I'll leave a link in the description below. But that gets us to the graphics, because while Metro Awakening looks fantastic in general, it does look the best in its PC and PlayStation VR2 versions. And that is thanks to the better textures, models, and much better lighting, which is made possible thanks to the more advanced hardware. But if you're rocking a Meta Quest 3 or Quest 3S, then I'm sure you will still be heavily impressed by the graphics it manages to pull off, especially when you compare it to the original Quest 2 release. Because in that case, the Quest 3 has some big enhancements that go from improved reflections to better material definitions, as well as an increased rendering solution that makes the game run at pretty much 1.3 times the graphics compared to that of Quest 2. And all of that while adding in more real-time shadows and anisotropic filtering, which should make things look sharper even at longer distances. But that gets us to the story. Now, without any big spoilers, in this game that is set in 2028, you will be playing as a doctor that tries to navigate its way through the shadowy tunnels of the Moscow metro system, and that all while in search for his missing wife. And this journey comes nicely together with some emotional storytelling that includes topics like loss and revenge, which is all heavily elevated thanks to some great voice action, so that you as the player truly feel the impact of certain events, as well as grow your connection between characters as a whole. But we should also talk about the comfort, because while Metro Awakening offers a full set of modern VR comfort options, including teleporting, it would probably feel less comfortable to those sensitive of motion discomfort compared to an equivalent game with more open environments and less frequent stare motion. And this is mostly present in some moments of the game where the horizon is shifted significantly, but for most, these are brief enough to not be problematic. And in general, all other settings can be changed a lot to your own liking and could help if you normally experience some motion problems, with the biggest one probably being the previously mentioned announcement of the arachnophobia mode that will be included. But that gets us to the final conclusion. Metro Awakening is a faithful recreation of the original series inside virtual reality, and thanks to it, it should deserve the recognition as it being one of the best first-person shooter horror games that are out there. And this is all because of its immersive story, as well as its tense atmosphere that while halfway through can get slightly repetitive. It is this VR adventure that still manages to haunt some players long after the credits roll. But that's not all, because there are also some big free VR games that you need to try. So click on the video that you see on screen right now to make sure you don't miss out. And of course, stay awesome.